Everyone's familiar with MLK, Martin Luther King, and his I Have a Dream speech and his work in civil rights. But are you familiar with his work in housing, or at least just his ideas around housing and where he was at on housing? Let's look into that. This is going to be a real quick one. I just wanted to break down some things or just look at some things from the NAR perspective and in terms of the data. And then also just look at a speech that he wrote in I believe 1966 or 67. And let's just go in and take a look at that. So obviously it's Martin Luther King Day today. Hopefully you're out in your communities and you're helping serve your communities. Maybe your community has an event or something like that, like just hopefully that you're getting out and, if nothing else, at least hopefully you're educating yourself on some other things that he did than posting a graphic of what we've heard every single year for a million years, right? Not a million years, since 1986, I believe it's 86 or 83. So, but I just want to make sure that we're honoring his legacy in a way that we are educating ourselves on what's happening. And also, especially in this time, you have an administration that's literally using this as a dog whistle, if you will, to show where they're at in terms of, racial equity. I mean, when they talk about DEI not being a thing, it's just like, wow. So we're going to go into some numbers today and we're going to go take a look at, what his impact has been and where we can improve. So in terms of housing, for sure. So I found this article. It's from the Housing Forward Virginia website. And the headline says, it's fair to say everyone is familiar with Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, but do you know about his work in housing? So every year since 1986, wow, 86, the United States has observed the birth date of Martin Luther King. And it goes on to say down here where it talks about, we know the story here. So for most of the 20th century, racial segregation was codified in the law. Black Americans faced discrimination, intimidation, and violence that more than often than not relegated them into poor quality housing. Dr. King recognized housing as being one of the core components of racial justice and equity, so he took action. And then it has an excerpt from one of his speeches from 1966 at Chicago Soldier Field Stadium as part of the Chicago Open Housing Movement. And the statement reads this: "We are here today because we are tired. We are tired of paying more for less. We are tired of living in rat-infested slums. We are tired of having to pay median rent of $97 a month in Lawndale for 4 rooms, while whites living in South Deering pay $73 a month for 5 rooms. Now it's time to make real of the promises of democracy. Now is the time to open doors of opportunity for all of God's children." I don't have a problem with that statement. I don't have a problem with that statement. I think it's, he was standing up for the right things. But in terms of housing, you can see how it adds up when you have the rent and all of these other things. You're not getting what everybody else is getting. And you literally can't buy homes in certain areas due to redlining and things of that nature. So it goes on to say, before he was assassinated in 1968, Dr. King helped co-lead the Chicago Freedom Movement from 1965 to 1966. At the time, Chicago was one of the most residentially segregated cities, and the movement sought to challenge discrimination in employment, education, and housing. So he was doing this work around housing, towards the end of his career really, really strongly. And, I think that it needs to be known. I don't think when I was growing up, that wasn't something that I was aware of, So the movement that he was working with in Chicago called for open housing to let Black people seek home ownership to do so wherever they wished. Along with Dr. King, many fair housing advocates used testing as a way to expose housing discrimination. Testing involved individuals who, without any intent to purchase or rent a home, pose as buyers. I'm assuming working with real estate agents. More acts from tenants and residents of Chicago supporting the movement included rent strikes, business boycotts, and hosting youth workshops that emphasized activism. That's dope. They had the youngins getting involved. That's dope. In 1966, the movement achieved some victories. The Chicago Housing Authority promised to expand public housing and to implement anti-discriminatory practices, all of which it did. The movement also served as a lesson for housing advocates today by stressing the importance of local policies, building coalitions and of diverse groups and stakeholders, and emphasizing that everyone played a role in forwarding the movement, no matter how big or small. Above all, the biggest victory to come was the Fair Housing Act in 19. So the Fair Housing Act was signed into law 1 week after Dr. King's assassination. This act prohibited discrimination in the sale and rental of housing. Today, over 50 years later, that act is still in place, but we remain a long way off from realizing Dr. King's housing vision. While we achieved victories in equitable and affordable housing, we should remain inspired to continue fight for housing equality. All right, so that is the story of 19 Chicago Soldier Field, or behind the Chicago open housing movement and his work over there, and so I like the end of that and how it called for us to act on, our current situation, which we have not realized that. So let's take a look at those numbers. All right, so let's go here to the National Association of Realtors website. So here you have the National Association of Realtors website. This is an article that talks about the snapshot, and actually it's a report with data from 2003 was the last data point, I believe. I want to say it's 2013 to 2023. I mean, obviously it goes back further than that, but I think there's some of these that are that 10-year deal. But that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the snapshot of race in American home buying in America based on the National Association of Realtors article here. So I just wanted to point a couple things out and just take a look at some things here. It says homeownership trends by race in the last decade. So we're going to look at homeownership trends based on race in 19. Oh yeah, there it goes. It says the data from 2013 to 23 studies of gains in homeownership. This first chart, we're looking at homeownership trends by race in the last decade. So you can see, like, say, for example, white is 68.8% in 2013, and it's in 2023, it's 72.4%. So it's increased. That's good for white folks. Asian folks, 57.8% to 63.4% over that 10-year span. That's a big jump. We're talking about a lot of people. So like that seems like a small percentage, but it's really not. That's a lot of people. And then for Hispanic folks, we're talking about 45.2% to 51%. That's a really big jump as well. And then Black folks is 41.9% to 44.7%, which is a jump as well. It's 3% jump. So it's not nothing. That's a lot of people. That's good. Everybody's improving. But what we're trying to talk about is the gap. So where did that gap start? Why did it start? And then what are we doing to, hopefully we don't have, make things more equitable. So maybe that gap can decrease in terms of, and by gap, I mean like the amount of which somebody is able to, the amount of which you're able to increase by. So for example, if white people are so far ahead from 68.8%, they're far above anybody else right here. Like we're at 44.7% for Black folks at the very bottom. That's a big gap. I believe that's like 30 points or so, close to that. So that's a big gap. And then when you look at the other gaps, you have Asian folks who are right up there. And then you have Hispanic folks down there with the Black folks, but they're above the Black folks. So, just being a Black person, I've experienced that and I know what that looks like and I see it and I experience it all the time in terms of systemically what we have to go through just to be on bump. Anyway, demographic trends, let's take a look at that. The age distribution plays a crucial role in shaping homeownership trends with different racial and ethnic groups. A younger growing population can drive future homeownership gains, while an aging population with homeownership rates can stabilize or sustain homeownership levels. So this chart looks at households of 25 to 40-year-olds and their 10-year growth. So 25 to 40-year-olds share of households. White, you have 23.4%. Black, you have 28%. Asian, you have 32.6%. And Hispanic, you have 33.6%. That's the share of the 25 to 40-year-old households that you have in terms of the percentages. So that's interesting that white is at 23.4% to me. That must be because there's just a lot of older They do 55 plus in the next one. So I'd be interested to look at that. The 10-year growth of this age group is negative 4.8% for white. For black, it's 10.3% in terms of the 10-year growth for this age group, 25 to 40. And then Asian is 34% and Hispanic is 20%. So Asian group has been in that 25 to 40-year-old group has been expanding the most. Now let's look down at households 55 plus by race and their home ownership rate. So I think this is where you see, so why you see the white, the white data point where it's at is because when you look down here, you see it's actually different. It looks way different. So the share of 55 plus folks, white people, is 51%. The home ownership rate is 82%. So that's very high, very, very high. The black home ownership rate is 59.4%. The Asian rate is 75.5% and Hispanic 65%. So when I look at this is how I see it when you talk about 55 and up, and this is which generation was probably impacted by far the most in terms of directly. Black folks being 41.9% of the 55 and up crowd, but only having the least amount of the least home ownership rate of that crowd. So 59.4%. And what I can surmise from that is that means that you don't have as many homes to pass down to, because that's what homes do. That's how families build generational wealth. You can't pass down. So if you have the second most people, but you have the lowest home ownership rate amongst that older group that had to deal directly with all of the BS, you can't pass that generational wealth down because you have the least amount of it. And then you have to fight all of the other things, the societal things and policing and no food. You know what I mean? Just because it says they own the house doesn't mean that it's in that certain area or it's not or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So that's a pretty big gap right there for 82%, 75%, 65%, and then 59% at the lowest. To me, when I look at this, I basically see that, yeah, we haven't gotten to where we want to get to in terms of, seeing Dr. King's dream through in terms of housing. So based on those numbers from National Association of Realtors, I'm just going off the numbers. That's just what I can surmise from that. So that was an interesting report. We'll look a little bit more into that, obviously, throughout the year on Inside Abode. But I just wanted to jump on here and say happy Martin Luther King Day. Hopefully you're resting for one and relaxing. Maybe you know what I'm saying? Go outside, get in your community, go play some hoop, go work out, go do something, but also reflect on where we're at as a country right now, reflect on what we need to do to activate and make sure that everybody can win. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just, to me, is so important. And this day is so important to me just because I like to sit and reflect. I reflect every day. Every day is MLK Day to me, just because of my experience and what I think about and what's always on my mind. But I like the fact that we all collectively as a country can take a pause on this, even if we have people that oppose it. Great. That's cool. That's what makes America great. You don't have to agree with it. And I ain't gonna be mad at you for that. That's your prerogative. That's your prerogative. People tell on themselves in terms of when they respond to something like that. So it's like, man, we just trying to get right. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, with that, y'all be good. Have a happy Martin Luther King Day, and we'll be back with another episode of Inside Abode. Y'all be good.